Assalamualaikum and a very good day. This is a brief safety information. When you hear the fire alarm, do not panic. Wait for the announcements from the building's public address system. Please remain calm and follow the instructions provided by an SC representative or an auxiliary police. If you have been asked to evacuate the building, please proceed to the nearest exit door. You will be guided by the SC representative or the auxiliary police to the assembly area located at the Pusat Sains Negara parking area. If you require any assistance during the evacuation process, please look for any auxiliary police officers at the assembly area. If you are at the parking area of lower ground 3 or lower ground 4 and in need of immediate assistance, please locate and press the panic button nearest to you. There are 14 panic buttons located on the pillars in the parking areas. You will be attended to by the SC Auxiliary Police as soon as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Sebelum memulakan majlis kita pada malam ini, dengan segala hormatnya diminta semua para hadirin untuk menetapkan telefon bimbit dalam mod senyap sepanjang majlis berlangsung. Untuk sebarang kecemasan, sila ikuti arahan pegawai keselamatan yang bertugas. Terima kasih. Para hadirin sekalian, mohon untuk berdiri.
Malaysia Madani, hai bersatu hati, kita semua sama Malaysia.
Satu hati walau berbilang bangsa dan bersama
Mengumumkan ketibaan Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar bin Ibrahim, Perdana Menteri, diiringi oleh Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Diraja Dr. Zamri Abdul Kadir, Menteri Pendidikan Tinggi, Yang Berhormat Senator Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah Azizan, Menteri Keuangan II, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Syamsul Azri Abu Bakar, Ketua Setiausaha Negara, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Muhammad Faiz Azmi, Pengerusi Suruhanjaya Sekuriti Malaysia SC, Div-Div Kehormat, rakan-rakan media, tuan-puan yang saya hormati sekalian.
Malaysia Madani, rakyat disantuni, satukan asa demi negara. Malaysia Madani, hai bersatu hati, kita semua sama Malaysia. Berdiri megah, selamanya kita bersama, warisan takkan binasa. Setia gagah bersama kita merdeka, kita semua anak Malaysia. Selamanya Malaysia, kita Melayu, Cina, India, Iban Kadasan kita sejiwa.
Para hadirin sekalian dijemput duduk. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Selamat datang ke Forum Ilmuwan Malaysia Madani Siri 12 yang bertajuk Memacu Kedudukan Malaysia dalam Gelombang Baharu Aliran Modal Global. Para hadirin sekalian, seterusnya, majlis dengan sukacitanya ingin menjemput Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar bin Ibrahim, Perdana Menteri untuk memulakan majlis Forum Ilmuwan Malaysia Madani Siri 12. Dipersilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin, nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil karim. Saudara Datuk Zamri, KPT, dan di sini bersama-sama kita Saudara Amir Hamzah, Saudara Faiz dari Suruhanjaya Security dan Alan Eng dari AMRO. Now, kita kena terima kasih dulu lah sebab you host. Jadi saya tak ada makan, semua saya ada cokodok. Kita teruskan siri Forum Ilmuwan ni. Dan saya terima kasih kerana Menteri KPT yang bantu menyelaras. Sebab sejak beberapa tahun yang lalu kita mulakan satu tradisi wacana kesejahteraan dan intellectual discourse. Ini menggalakkan apa yang dikatakan reason discourse dalam isu-isu yang kita kira kritikal untuk masyarakat dan negara. Dan kita bicarakan isu perpaduan kaum, cabaran fahaman, ideologi, soal kekuatan ekonomi dan kemelut ekonomi yang berlaku, soal transisi tenaga, soal IT dan AI. Itu dalam beberapa tajuk yang telah dibahaskan, dan dalam kebiasaannya kita bahagikan kepada 3 tokoh, seorang mewakili pandangan kerajaan yang dianggap boring tetapi penting kerana ia memberikan pengarahan tentang apa yang dasar yang dijalankan oleh kerajaan sekarang. Kemudian dari kalangan swasta atau maknanya mewakili syarikat, golongan korporat yang beri pandangan dari sudut swasta, dan juga dari kalangan syarikat kerajaan atau agensi, dan dalam konteks hari ini Suruhanjaya Security. Sekali saya tekankan tujuannya ialah untuk memberi ruang perbahasan atau perbincangan yang terbuka. Dia tidak terikat dengan satu aksi dasar tetapi ia memberi ruang untuk mendengar supaya dia dapat membantu kita bersama dalam negara merangka dasar yang boleh diubah suai. Kami dalam kerajaan Madani tidak menganggap bahawa kami punyai semua jawapan kepada masalah yang ada. Sebab itu, kita buka perbincangan ini yang lebih terbuka. Saya tidak fikir banyak negara ataupun dalam pengalaman negara kita yang kita ada sesi ini tiap bulan, walaupun ada sesi yang sampingan, kuliah-kuliah lain, tetapi dari apa yang disebutkan forum ilmuwan ini, secara berkala hampir setiap bulan, dan tujuannya ialah memberi ruang. Jadi umpamanya kalau Suruhanjaya Security beri pandangan dari sudut dia, Amir tentulah beri pandangan dari sudut apa yang dasar yang cuba dilaksanakan, diterokai oleh kerajaan, dan Alan Eng tentunya memberikan pandangan yang agak lebih terbuka dari pandangan swasta yang bukan semestinya terikat dengan pandangan kerajaan. Dan kita ambil sikap yang lebih terbuka mendengar hal-hal yang sedemikian. For tonight, of course, we have to deal with the macro framing and context setting. And we focus on the issue of securities, of course, not national security in that sense. Okay, and I think not only to allow or give the platform or forum to attract investments, but to place Malaysia as a more critical, functional role, to be more effective and influential in determining the policies orientation for the country or for the region. We do not want the agency, including the Securities Commission or Bursa for the matter, to be just a normal player, but it is our, I think, critical need at this time, particularly in our role and positioning in ASEAN and the region, to be able to undertake a responsibility which is probably higher, more ambitious than that. Secondly, as you know, the macroeconomic figures has been quite reassuring. Latest pronouncement by the Governor of the Central Bank seems to be more positive compared to our initial projections. This is something very, again, I said, very reassuring, because normally our projections tend to be a bit more conservative. But this time, all indicators shows or prove that we are able to perform much better last quarter last year, and also first quarter this year. But this is not to allow it to be more complacent, because some of you are familiar with this issue of culture of contentment, and that Galbraith reminded us a long time ago that one of the diseases that can inflict societies, leaders, governments, even the corporate sector, is the culture of contentment or culture of complacency, thinking that we have done our best and therefore damn the rest. It's not wise, of course. So it is therefore necessary to look at the potential threat, problems in this period of uncertainties, and to see how we can mitigate effectively and be more open, realistic. It's easier said than done here, but I think dealing with the people on the ground is not as easy. I tend to be a bit cynical when I hear economists and policymakers giving their prescriptions, but I used to tell them, can you go into the kampung and explain for a change and see if we can convince them. Tomorrow morning, for example, at 9:30, I'm inviting most of the players, the agencies involved in the pinjaman scheme ni, Bank Rakyat and Amanah Ikhtiar, Tekun, etc. Because from the KRI, Khazanah Research Institute report, last month came as a surprise to me, because once we gave hundreds of opportunities for people to have the microfinancing, apparently only 6% around Kuala Lumpur, Raja Shah, 6% are either getting this benefit. So there is, of course, a disconnect between the prescriptions and the pronouncements and the 6 billion disbursed or allocated and the benefit to the petty traders. 6% is to me too low. So I've asked them to really go back and find out. And tomorrow morning I'm going down to Taman Malawati, Pasar at Taman Malawati, to get these agencies to come down and so to talk to them. Why are you not benefiting or using these credit facilities? So just to remind you, see, there is that major issue of disconnect between ambitious or pronouncements and impressive prescriptions and what is it to the common man and woman. And that's been our challenge in the past, and I think this has been my call to my colleagues to do both. We have, of course, to deal with the macroeconomic issues, but at the same time to see how it can benefit the common person. So, saya akan mulakan. Terima kasih banyak dengan pertamanya Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah, Malaysia raising capital into capability, whatever it means.
Terima kasih, Datuk Sri. First and foremost, thank you for being here today. So I will live up to Datuk Sri's billing. I will be boring. And to some extent, I know there are a lot of very capable technocrats and economists and all these people here. So I'm going to read a little bit more of the script so that I don't get my facts wrong. So pardon me if I do that, but it's important so that we lay out to you what does the government's framing in terms of positioning Malaysia forward is going to be, yeah, and why is it important. And what we're really trying to do is to build long-term sustainable economy underpinned by a lot of flows of capital coming into Malaysia. Actually, there are two questions that frame Malaysia's position in the current global cycle. Firstly, whether Malaysia can be a safe haven for investors among the global turmoil that's happening, and whether Malaysia can ride the next wave of global capital flows. These two questions are, of course, interconnected. Safe haven status today is not simply being viewed as stable in a volatile world. It's about whether Malaysia can provide confidence, operating clarity, and depth of capability that allows capital to build from here. Asia's history has shown that global capital moves in waves. Singapore opened the door in the 1960s. The Plaza Accord routed Japanese manufacturing into Malaysia and Thailand in the 1980s. Indonesia rode the commodity boom and super cycle in the 2010s. And Vietnam was probably one of the bigger winners in the China Plus One manufacturing story. The next wave is actually layered with AI capital cycle and a global search for trusted neutrality, and is now arriving with a different set of requirements. This wave will be much more selective than its predecessors. Investors continue to look, of course, for returns, and they are also pricing in geopolitics, energy security, supply chain reliability, regulatory trust, talent depth, and policy consistency through the shocks that we are seeing. This is much more complex than what we've ever seen before. If you look at us today, actually we're in a pretty good shape. Approved investments hit a record high of 426.7 billion in 2025, the highest in the country's history, and domestic investments stood at 219.6 billion against foreign investment of 207 billion ringgit, showing that domestic conviction matches foreign conviction. As Datuk Sri mentioned just now, first quarter GDP held at 5.4% despite the Middle East crisis. Unemployment remains low at 2.9%, the lowest since 2014. And capital market continues to deepen across equities, bonds, sukuk, and private markets. These are good signals. This is a signal that the economy is healthy, continues to grow, and continues to attract the right things into the market. I believe that none of this is accidental. It is the story of Malaysia, of what we have been able to do, to be able to create an environment that inspires confidence that people want to come. I'm going to borrow a little bit from the Economy Madani framework and use the framing of raising, or in our sense, use the term raise to underpin the storyline that I want to tell to you today. Raise is actually about building a framework that actually underpins the Malaysian economy. And this is the story of where Malaysia began the journey over the last 3 years. And this is why we are seeing the results pay for itself. It starts first with reforming foundations, because foundations is important to create a method that builds trust. And when trust is embedded in, it makes it easier for capital to actually want to come. Second, activate capital. This puts actually domestic capital to work together with foreign capital. And you'll see in the storyline that we're doing that there's a lot of efforts done to actually inspire domestic capital to come in, to match foreign capital. So the engine of growth of the economy is also activated. Third is looking at how we improve investability so that stronger companies, quality listings, and broader instruments are created so there's depth in the market, so that new, capable innovation can come to life within the Malaysian environment. The next is also talking about, after we've done that stage, talking about how do we strengthen capability in technology complexity, productivity upgrading, and pushing up the value chain. And that's been an anchor in our RMK. If you look about RMK 13, you look about our NSS, you look about our new industrial master plan, it talks about raising complexity for the country, because complexity builds better opportunities for the future. It also focuses about raising capability for our people so that they will earn a better life in the way forward. And lastly, we need to talk about scale. How do we actually enhance the capacity to scale up so that these small nuances that get created get actually energized to build a better and stronger Malaysia? So today I'm going to use these 5 things as the anchor for Malaysia's story. If I go to the next slide. Okay. This is where the Economy Madani framework and the Madani government actually really started first. Because without a good set of foundations, no economy can be built. And you saw us push through by creating first a framing that says we have to get our basic policies in the country right. And what did we do? We actually rolled out a Fiscal Responsibility Act so that we're trying to actually enhance the capacity that fiscal discipline is improved in the country. That was tabled about nearly 3 years ago. And that's guided how we put the foundations of the economy in a better shape. After that, we rolled out things like the productivity reform in the civil service, and we also came out and put out a Government Procurement Act to make sure in behavioral sort of things, we actually underpin it with good processes, good framing, with transparency along the way. And it's beginning to pay dividends to us. Fiscal deficit dropped from 6.4% to 3.7%. GDP remains resilient, and headline inflation remains very, very manageable within the country. And despite the challenges of what we've seen this year, headline inflation still remains at about 1.9% within the range of what Bank Negara has been guiding. Yeah? Our approved investments have gone up, and you've seen us take difficult decisions, brave decisions, which has allowed us then to free fiscal space. Fiscal space is very, very important because then we can start using the fiscal space that's used for either incentivizing and bringing more investment to the country to grow the economy, and also to cushion the impact of what's happening to the vulnerable groups in Malaysia. Hence, the approach of fiscal reform through subsidy rationalization or not about removing subsidies, but about better targeting, so we don't leave anybody behind. And you've seen it also pay back through reform through the civil service, reform through our institutions and so on, and our competitiveness has also gone up, jumping 11 places within this space, from 34 to 23. Our ratings reflect the confidence that people outside see in us in the reaffirmation of ratings that we've got. And remember, the last 2 years have been probably about the most volatile around. And outside, people are recognizing Malaysia. Yeah? The reaffirmation shows that what we've been doing actually is good. Trust has been built along the way. And if you don't believe that, look at how people behave. Yeah? Actually, our MGS now has a bigger shareholding held by foreign governments because they understand that putting money into Malaysia is a much safer bet than putting in somewhere else. I think that's the important thing. We started first with building a foundation that people can stand on. Next. After that, it's about we've got trust, we've induced capital to come in from foreign investor. Let's talk about how do we induce our own domestic market to be as confident with us. And you've seen us talk a lot about Gear Up. Gear Up is about how do we get our GLIC and GLCs to also play a meaningful part in Malaysia. Provide capital to energize capability that exists in the country so they get to come to realization. This is not small. Yeah? Gear Up has committed to put into hand 120 billion in 5 years. Last year we crossed more than 20 billion that Gear Up put into place. And this is on top of the normal 440 billion that our GLICs commit to put into the Malaysian market. That's why if you see our market is flush with liquidity. We've not had major shifts in terms of the ability to raise capital in the country. The bond markets are pretty stable. Interest rates within this range has also been stable because liquidity is rich. What we need to do now is to deploy the liquidity in the right form. Hence, the orchestration from the government is actually to help. Which are pockets of economy that we needed to induce? Private capital, venture capital, partnerships with international investors and so on. So we kind of turbocharge the economy using domestic capital as a feeder to do it. And you've seen that despite all these challenges, this year particularly, we are still net up 2.1 billion ringgit from both equity and bond markets. That is a sign of confidence in the economy. But in doing this, we also don't forget that the economy is very broad. We have big entities, and we have small entities, and we have individuals. So the role of government is also to look at how capital is deployed across the network. We don't leave small entities behind. Therefore, microfinancing is also important to us, and support to the SMEs are also very important. Hence, you've seen through the budget last year, for example, our SJPP guarantee schemes were up to 30 billion. Yeah? Our credit schemes to support housing growth in Malaysia was up to 20 billion. Yeah? Microfinancing has been provided, so small businesses also have opportunity to flourish. And that's the tenet of the economy Madani framework. We want to address and bring capability, bring economic growth into the country, but we want to drag everybody up with it. We do not want to leave people behind, and we don't want the disparity to grow within the country. It's not good if headline numbers are great, but it doesn't translate down to the bottom line and to people along the way. You've seen that happen. It's good. It's paying dividends, and it's working through. Now, what we have to do next is actually talking about how do we improve investability in the country. This is talking about the quality of companies that's coming, and later, Dr. Faiz will be talking about the journey in the capital market plan that's coming up, and the initiatives that Bursa is doing in trying to up the value of our top companies as a marker of driver. I know there's a lot of criticisms that if you look at the Malaysian market, it's boring. It's boring because it's traditional along the way. So part and parcel of what we're trying to orchestrate is jazz up, sexy up the investing community in Malaysia. So alhamdulillah, you've seen that happen, right? Recently, Skychip's listings was very, very well received, 4 times more than the offer price. And it's new tech that's actually coming in. When Opstar picked up the ARM token, their share price drove by 112% up the market. Why? It's because there was confidence that a local player had the capacity to embrace capability and was building forward. And we're beginning to ride on the new AI technology, the new digital economy in a better form. So for us, we must spend time here. We must spend time in improving the players that are in the market. We must spend time in growing new segments of the businesses so we catch the new wave that's coming in. And in order to do that, government also plays a role. We have rolled out the beginnings of a new industrial incentive framework. So the way that we align our incentive framework is actually to attract the right types of investment in the country, and it's outcome-based. Yeah? I'm no longer looking at bringing investments on headlines. I want investment that actually comes in that aligns with our industrial master plan, it aligns with NSS, it produces the type of quality and deepens the ecosystem in Malaysia, and also more importantly, balances growth within Malaysia. So we will reward investment that come in that put development in lesser developed parts of Malaysia also. Because when we do that, we even out the impact to society. We close the gap that exists, and we reduce the pressures that we have in urban centers in Malaysia. That's what we've been trying to do in doing it, not just from a firm point of view, but also from a government policy point of view to drive it forward. Next slide. Can I move to the next slide, please? Okay. Strengthening capability. This is important because what strengthening capability talks about is actually looking at upping capability within a country, embracing technology, driving complexity, and valuing up. I think a lot of effort and a lot of headlines you've seen. Yeah? Malaysia has been successful in attracting investment. Let me share with you some of the things that we've been doing. Intel's committed to bring in $7 billion of investment into Malaysia. And what they're bringing in is not doubling up what they've got today. They're bringing in advanced packaging from Malaysia. The next growth that's coming in that will be operating by 2028, with the early stage operating by the end of this year, is about bringing advanced packaging capability in Malaysia. And as part and parcel of the incentive mechanism, we tied also to their commitment to develop labor and capability within Malaysia, develop the ecosystem that will embrace that part. So what we're trying to do is trying to look for these things, to bring in more things, because Malaysia no longer wants to compete on cheap labor, cheap land, tax incentives. That's not the way forward for us. What we need to compete on is capability, differentiation, positioning in the world today, scale of operation, integration into the global supply chain. And that's what the government is orchestrating with what we've got. And it pays itself back. If I look at 2023, the median wage manufacturing rose by 5.4%. Seems small, but you must remember this is median. Median means we bring everybody up that value chain along the way. We've also already trained 18,000 engineers along the way and technical workers, with the NSS target of about 30% of 60,000 already achieved in this form. Yeah? Types of investments, bringing in the semiconductor space and anchoring on key players in Malaysia. But not just key players, not just them expanding the chain, but also pushing further ahead and using people like Nanoscam Works to actually go further up the value chain. And actually, the interesting thing is Nanoscam Works is a Malaysian deep tech company. So all we want is actually to create those things that sit within our ecosystem, deepen our ecosystem, and create better jobs for Malaysians along the way. The more we do it, the stronger we are, the more likely we will retain our leaderships in the spaces that we are, and we make it very, very hard for people to leave us. And I think that's what we want. Yeah? Attracting investments is one thing. Keeping them in the country is a totally different ballgame. Creating opportunity for our people to scale up, to be able to use that as a launchpad to grow and take their space in the world, and it's an even bigger desire. And I think that's what we're focusing on to position Malaysia in a better form. Next slide. Lastly, enable scale. We've got to do this. If we only attract and we have small entities that come in and they operate into their small little world, we will never be relevant enough in the world today. And if you look at the E&E sector and semiconductor, that's what we've been doing in the years, right? We started our journey in semiconductors in 1970s when Intel first came to Malaysia. Along the way, we grew and we attracted more people coming in, the AMDs of the world, the Motorola's of the world, the Infineons of the world, and so on. They added to the chain. They began to do businesses between each other. They spun off domestic companies. We've had the Vitrox of the world also come up along the way and deepening that value chain. So our role is actually scale it up. Today, Malaysia accounts for 13% of the global semiconductor space. In the A&E space, we also account for about that same amount. So if you all spend time in reading the National Industrial Master Plan, you will find the priority sectors that matter to Malaysia. And what we do is we want to shift more and more Malaysia to become relevant, deep value chains being built up, and capability anchored into Malaysia that makes us hard to dislodge. That is what we are trying to orchestrate to make sure Malaysia wins the game as we go forward. And we've seen successes. To do it, some of the things that the government does is to do new things. The GSEZ is an example of that. Because we tried to actually break perceptions along the way. Who says we compete to Singapore all the time? Why can't we make a methodology that says both can win? Yeah? Each playing off its own strength and combine that basis. And that's the logic of the GSEZ. Each picking its own thing and supporting it, but value comes to both sides, not one side alone. You've seen us pick the battle on data centers. You've seen us pick the battle on AI. You've seen us pick the battle on E&E and semiconductors, anchor and put it in. And these numbers show that it's paying off. So in Malaysia, you've got a very vibrant GSEZ growing now. It's the biggest investment zone in Malaysia at this point of time. You've got the northern cluster between Penang, Kulim, Kerian, anchoring down the E&E and semiconductor sort of space. Klang Valley also developing, but on high end in terms of chip designs and so on inside here. You've got the E&E sector, the oil and gas sector in Pengerang and Kerteh, and now spreading also to Sarawak in terms of energy sectors along that line and in Sabah along the way. So again, putting things in the right spot, deepening the capacity, deepening the value chain, and making the capital work for us. At the same process, grow development in the country, balance economy in the country. So that is our game. So let me just close with a few key points. This journey is not a short journey. It is a long journey. The long journey needs continuity to be driven through, and it needs stability. And what we need to do today is actually to drive and use the stability that we've got to anchor and position Malaysia forward. The story of where we got today is a story that gives us hope. It gives us hope because we've seen it pay back along the way, which is why Malaysia is very attractive and resilient despite all the challenges that's happening in the world today. But there are key things that we need to also focus. First, how do we change capital into capability? The models that we talked about today is about putting things in the right blocks, building foundations that people can stand on, putting government support to make sure it drives up along the way, building sustainable long-term capability. That journey must continue. Reform, activating capital, strengthening the companies, enabling skill must continue to be the way forward for Malaysia. But beyond that, we also need to have a test of durability. What we build today must sustain in the future. So that change is not just about capital. That change is also building capacity whereby our own ecosystems are deep. Yeah, our own ecosystems have local players that are integrated in whole value chain. That system produces more talent as it produces ahead. That's one way we build resilience and sustainability in the country. That's the version that the government actually wants to do. I used to be an investor, managing plenty of money outside. And my belief, the more you build and the deeper that you build your ecosystem, the more integrated your domestic ecosystem are to foreign investment that comes in, the more resilient you are. Every company that comes in that actually puts money on the ground wants stability. Every company that comes in wants life to be easy. In today's world, shortening supply chains are very important. The more we deepen, the more we do it, the harder it is for people to leave us. And our role is to do that. How do we get capital to translate, to build the ecosystem that makes things sticky? Make it very hard for people to leave and build the resilience and build capability for the forward and position forward.
Right.
The last thing I just want to leave, is we need also mindset change. Yeah? And this is important. If we want to go up that value chain, our adaptability of innovation, our adaptability of accepting that risk must also be addressed in a better form. And the reality is sometimes we will fail. And acceptance of change is important. So sometimes we are our worst enemy because we have gone up and grown up in an environment that failure is not acceptable. And because of that, we stop people to take risks along the way. What we want is smart risk and balance and build resilience in the economy. If we do that, then we will build a better Malaysia that is resilient, capable, and going forward. And I believe that's what's happening today. And I think we are on a great path to be the key player in ASEAN going forward. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah telah berikan satu kerangka besar tentang dasar dan haluan negara. Saya tak mau panjangkan kerana kita ada Datuk Muhammad Faiz yang punya cabaran besar untuk menyegarkan pasaran dan memberikan lonjakan. Saya tak tahu bila, tapi biar dia jawab. Sila, kerana Datuk Muhammad Faiz akan bicara soal role of the capital market, CMP and regional positioning.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good evening. So let me start by thanking the Prime Minister and the Minister of Higher Education, Datuk Zamri, for the opportunity to host the 12th edition of the Forum Ilmuwan Malaysia Madani here in the Securities Commission. I'd also like to thank YBPM, YBMK2 and Alan for agreeing to spend the evening with us to share their thoughts. I'd also like to thank those of you who had to purchase a batik shirt because you didn't read the dress code. Thank you for supporting our batik industry. Now, you've heard MK2 explain very eloquently about what the country has been doing. And that's very important, right? Because the domestic investments, the fiscal reforms, as well as the focus on doing what we do best is actually a very strong foundation. Regulators don't create value, we facilitate things. So it's very important the foundation is there. I also note that YBMK2 mentioned the word boring 3 times. So let me address that point. In this world of uncertainty, being boring is a good thing. Because being boring means we're not giving surprises, we're giving gradual but steady returns, and we are looking at long-term value creation. So, not a bad thing to be. Now, the first slide is just to make a few points. Firstly, despite everything that is happening around the world in the challenging global environment, Malaysia's economic and market indicators are still displaying a lot of resilience. Now, if you look, for example, at the predictions on our GDP, even the international bodies are recognizing that we're going to still be positive. Okay, we can argue what number, but it's still generally positive, which is a sign of resilience. The other thing that comes up from our perspective then, well, what about the capital market itself? How is that doing? So I'm very pleased to say that the fundraising momentum still remains intact from last year. We are continuing to attract foreign flows, and actually there's a positive net inflow for both equity and bonds. So just to illustrate the point, YBMK mentioned about Skychip. Skychip is interesting, right? Because it's actually part of the semicon industry. It's a design studio. But when they went to market at 88 cents, it kind of hit a high of about 380, settled at about 230. But the point is, it went up after IPO. The other thing it had an impact on was what, well, we in the capital market side looks at, which is the average daily turnover. So it's been averaging about 3.4 billion a day. Because of Skychip, for 2 days, it was 4.8 million, right? So clearly, there's a lot of activity going on out there. Another data point is the market capitalization itself. At the beginning of the year, it was 4,313 billion. Now, as at April, it has grown by 161 billion. Why is that important? Because PM's KPI to me is I want 2 trillion more in 5 years. So if you take 2 trillion divided by 5 is 400. Okay lah, alhamdulillah, 161 is getting there lah. Okay. The other message, I guess, is, and going back to the word boring, is actually when I talk to outside investors, they do see us as a safe haven. We don't do flip-flop on policies. We're quite consistent in what we say. And we also do recognize the rule of law, because you forget, to an outside investor, they just want to be treated properly. So all those things are still exist now, and I believe will continue, which continues to make us attractive. Now, having said all that, let's talk about where does the master plan and the capital markets come to play. Next slide. So we paid a very expensive consultant for a house. That's it there, with the 4 pillars. 3 of them are not specifically about global, but I'll still mention them in the context of what we're trying to do. The first pillar is really about vibrancy, market vibrancy. So the measurement to us is, can I move it from 4.3 trillion to 6.3 trillion? Now, I've had a lot of comments saying, boleh ke? Can you really do 2 trillion in 5 years? So the number 6.3 was there for 2 reasons. Firstly, it represents about an 8% CAGR over 5 years. And it's also my birth year, 63. So I'm quietly confident we will get there. Now, how are we going to do this? As YBMK2 mentioned, the My Value Up is the key tool. And so we did sit down and consider the various options. Should I make it mandatory? Is it voluntary? Should I bring everyone? And we finally decided, let's do the 80-20 rule. And so 88 of our top market capitalization companies represent more than 80% of the market cap. So we're going to focus on them. We've had a few workshops. We've tried to explain to them why we're doing this. And really, it's about helping them sell a better story to investors, right? That's principally the idea. I mean, yes, I know there's disclosures, and yes, there's all kind of things you have to do. But for example, we pointed out to many of them that there's about 4 or 5 of this 88 that don't have any analysts covering them, which is kind of ridiculous, right? You want to sell your share, but you're not articulating it enough for an analyst to be interested in you. We're also looking at the use of indexes like MSCI and FTSE and so on, because we realize that currently now, a lot of global funds use passive investing rather than active. So we do need to look at that. So that's what we are principally doing here. And as I said, from our perspective, that's actually where the needle will be changed. The other thing, of course, within market vibrancy is we also realize that in terms of GDP, we're only about the 6th in ASEAN. So if an investor was to come to Malaysia, what else can they invest in other than Malaysian stocks? So part of the strategy is to look and revitalize ETFs, because ETFs can be listed on Bursa, but actually have ASEAN risk. So we are talking now about creating a Sharia tool, for example, so I can relatively cheaply actually go and Sharia screen some of the ASEAN counters to be able to support an ASEAN ETF. So that's market vibrancy. The second pillar there is inclusivity. I'm not sure why there's a diamond, but we're not giving out diamonds to everyone. But really, it's to say a few things. First is, we totally support the government's view of Madani. We should not leave people behind. And there are two particular sectors that we're focusing on. One, retirees. I know there's a lot of you in the audience. And one of the things we're asking is, are the returns on your investments sufficient to let you, kind of retire comfortably? And it's a very big question, right? Because I don't think the answer is yes. The other group that we're looking at is, of course, the SME sector. As you know, SMEs contribute 40% of the GDP. We've identified there's probably about 18,000 of them, which are kind of mid-tier companies. And they're important not just because they're important to the economy, but this is my talent pool to get future listed companies. So we're looking at that. And one of the key things we realized is there is a funding gap. There is a funding gap between what SMEs need and what banks are currently willing to provide. It's about 286 billion in difference, but we hope to try and close that gap by half, 130 billion in 5 years. Pillar 3 is sustainability. I've been asked a lot of questions. Why is SC so sibuk looking at rivers? So maybe I'll explain it this way. We do have national plans, right? We have the NETR. We are developing a national adaptation plan. But all this, unfortunately, are non-bankable projects. I mean, what's the return on a seawall? So the reason why SC is looking at this area is we're trying to understand how do we crowd in private capital to mengurangkan beban on government. So what I tell my team is, every ringgit of private money coming in is one less ringgit that government has to spend. So that's why we're interested in this space. Now, Pillar 4 is really what the topic's about, global capital. YBMK2 has spelled out very clearly what we're doing internally on domestic investment. But when we started to look around, we realized a truism. So at the moment, we estimate that there's probably about 20% of our equity have foreigners holding it. Bonds about 13%, and that kind of goes up and down. But when we look at some of the key economies, China, for example, we discovered that Malaysia has invested in $7.5 billion worth of equity and bonds in China, but they have only invested 2.5 billion back. Why is that? Well, I know why, because there's an outfit called SAFE that stops Chinese putting money out. But we do have to look at these capital flows. Why is there no, synchronicity in this? So that's why, we went off to Beijing. That was a fascinating trip. I didn't know we are referred to as Tama in Beijing, which means great horse, apparently. But these are the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out who are the sticky investors, not global funds that flow in and flow out depending on indexes. And the kind of sticky investors we're looking for are pension funds, sovereign funds, development funds, because these people generally tend to buy and keep, right, which suits us very well. And so that's why you'll see in the Capital Master Plan, there's a whole pillar for this to go and focus on what's going on. We also realized that we've somehow over the time kind of forgotten our friends. So, for example, the GCC have money, but very little of it is over here. In fact, the only significant finding I could find was that Saudi Arabia has 5 billion ringgit of our MGS, but no one else. So again, we need to understand where the capital is, and we need to figure out how to get the sticky investors to come to Malaysia. So to conclude, really we're about trying to attract a different set of investors to kind of bring in global capital, which currently we don't have. And that's really to help our own agenda in terms of the development of the country and so on. And really this will help provide more economic activity, better products, improve returns, both for local and foreign investors. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih Tok Muhammad Faiz. I think beri new sense of relief and hope. This projection and the enormous potential untapped and identifying areas and sub-regions that we can probably give better focus and emphasis. And I think, of course, the Gulf countries are one, even China in that sense. So we look forward to more vibrant activity here, because market gives some semblance of indicator how the country can be can propel its general growth and economy. So I wish you all the best. Now next, from Ellen Ng, Group Head and Lead Economist, ASEAN Plus 3, Macroeconomics Research Office, AMRO. I mean, the whole title is that long. Huh?
You can call us AMF.
Tajuk dia, Regional Context and the Changing Nature of Investability.
Right. Yang Berhormat Perdana Menteri, Yang Berhormat Datuk Siri Amir Hamzah, Datuk Faiz, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tremendous honor for me to be here on this panel. And at the outset, I would like to, as an economist in today's world, I would have to agree with Datuk Faiz that boring is good. All right, we wish that we don't have to look at Twitter every morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, waiting for tweets from a certain president. I would like to say that I am an international civil servant now, and for the past few years I have the privilege of looking at this region from that perspective. I hope that doesn't imply that I'm internationally boring as well. But let me share my 3 key takeaways. The first, from the research that AMRO has done, I think it's now very clear that the global center of gravity has shifted to this region. And when I say region, I mean ASEAN and the +3 economies, Northeast Asia, China, Japan, and Korea. Secondly, in this current global landscape of deep uncertainty and geoeconomic fragmentation, resilience is part of competitiveness itself. Like, just to echo what the Tofai said earlier, being boring is good. Lastly, and here's really my key message, to attract more capital, Malaysia must first export more capital. So let me take each in turn. My first message is really about the map, because we are talking about riding the global capital flows. We need to know the map before we can talk about riding the next wave, and we need to know where the wave is breaking. So the center of gravity of the global economy has shifted to this very region, and it has shifted in 3 waves, each layered on the last. So in the early 2000s, around the time when China entered the WTO, this region became the world's factory. Right? Supply chains deepened around China, and Malaysia became part of the most integrated production network in the world. ASEAN +3 now produces more than 40% of global output. 40% of global output comes from this region itself. Then, after the global financial crisis, the wave moved, and the region got richer. About 2009 or so, China quietly overtaken the US as the most important source of final demand for most economies of this region, including Malaysia. So today, ASEAN +3 accounts for 28% of global final demand. It's larger than the US. The region has become the largest source of final demand of the world today, not the US. Right? And within the region, we are now relying more on each other as final consumers. And the third wave has only just arrived. In 2024, for the first time ever, China's net international investment position, excluding official reserve, that is the net private capital, turned positive. Joining Japan and Korea, some of the world's largest net creditors, China is now a structural capital exporter from a private sector perspective. So factory, market, and now source of global capital. And that is the map. And in a way, Malaysia is very much embedded in all 3. Now, my second message is about the wind, right? What the current environments reward. 3 shocks in 5 years. We have the pandemic, the 2025 tariff reset, and the Middle East disruption. And those have changed what it means to be competitive. The Strait of Hormuz episode made the point most starkly. A single choke point can overturn the economic outlook of an entire region, and indeed the world, in a matter of hours. So the line between economic security, economic performance, and competitiveness has blurred significantly. The question global capital asks today is no longer just how cheap and how fast you can produce. It's about how reliably and how securely you can keep producing through whatever the world throws at you. In short, how boring you are, really. So in short, resilience has been repriced into competitiveness. To be resilient is to be competitive. Right? I think in the past, competitive means that you produce things very cheaply. Now, being resilient itself is being competitive. So Malaysia begins from a position of structural advantage, as for the reasons outlined earlier. But I think it's important we continue to build resilience, not from a defensive posture, but from a proactive perspective that it is essential for Malaysia to remain attractive. And this is my third message and last message. It's about the boat, what Malaysia must become to ride the wave further. Malaysia's next phase of economic development cannot rest on inward FDI alone. The next leap is the internationalization of our Malaysian firms. Now, this is a framework that I've been developing and communicating for some years, since my time in the SC, really. Many years ago, that we would remember. So as an economy develops, the structure of the economy typically evolves through 4 stages, right? From resource-based to domestic-centric to export-oriented, and ultimately to become internationally focused. Now, Malaysia has done remarkably well through the first 3. Internationalization is the leap that has yet to be made at scale. And this really connects back directly to the capital flows question. Global institutional capital does not invest in countries in the abstract. They invest, among others, in companies, right? The deeper the universe of Malaysian firms operating regionally and globally, the more attractive Malaysia becomes to portfolio investors, right? The strongest signal Malaysia can send to the next wave of global capital is the visible emergence of Malaysian firms that global investors recognize as a natural way to take exposure to ASEAN and the broader region, right? Exporting capital that is becoming the very source of FDI ourselves by expanding abroad, by being regional, is how we can do that. That is why I said to attract more capital, Malaysia must first export more capital. Now, to bring the 3 together, the map has moved towards us, towards the region. The wind rewards those who build resilience into the very foundation of competitiveness itself. And the boat that we need, Malaysian firms with the scale, the footprint, and a global presence to carry the country into the next phase. So let me end here. Thank you, Yang Berhormat.
Short but heavy. I think Alan, thank you very much, because I think you have provided a challenge to us to make sure that the leap is more substantive than just a not common normal leap, but then to make sure that we internationalize. Can we just elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think there is a tendency to look at the transformation of economy through 3 phases, right? You resource-based, you move to manufacturing, and then export-oriented. And you tend to think about it being moving to services. I think that is not the most effective way to think about how an economy can move to the frontier of productivity. How other countries have actually done it is actually for firms to then look beyond just exporting from your own country, right? How can you expand beyond that? So think of the easiest ways to think of like semiconductors sector. Do we have the Samsung, SK Hynix, and so on, right? And even in the services sector, do we have companies that do not look at themselves as just slowly producing for ourselves, for our own country, right? Are we regionally focused? Are we making a company such that our market is actually ASEAN or ASEAN plus 3 and so on? Because that's how you expand. The scope of a domestic economy is limited for us. We are not China, we are not continental size. Malaysia is 30 million people. So for us to expand beyond and to be at the frontier, we need to internationalize.
Terima kasih. So kita buka untuk perbincangan, pandangan, teguran. Ya, sila.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Anwar Shuib from Malaysian Financial Planning Council. Um, it's very nice to hear the word boring just now, but it relates to, I believe, about ethical ecosystem, ethical business, ethical investing, ethical governance, and ethical education system. And some people wanted to make things interesting, such as a certain country do pump in their retirement fund into risky investment. And I believe now they are in the hot soup currently. And my question is, how can we ensure that we stay boring through generations, where some people, they said they can't live in the boring world and wanted something that are adventurous to feel alive? Thank you.
Don't be too concerned about my term, my boring term. I'm just joking. It's always important that the minister or the prime minister joke at the expense of his minister of finance. Okay, now can anyone respond?
Sure, thank you, sir. So I would certainly echo what YAB PM says. As I mentioned earlier, boring does not necessarily mean bad, right? Because it just says that there are no surprises. Investors don't like surprises. They like to see, gradually increasing value. So when you say, can we have adventures? Actually, our market can cater for both. There are counters which are exciting, and we are also looking at building a bridge with Hong Kong. So in fact, next month, I believe, my counterparts with Hong Kong are coming to Malaysia to discuss how we can connect Malaysia with the Hong Kong market. So if you really want to get excited, that's Hong Kong, right? But I would certainly say that if you're looking to build a nest egg for pensions, for retirement, then look at the counters that we have here, right? I mean, I was looking at one the other day. 4 years ago, it was 8 ringgit. But because that company changed their strategy and explained it well, they're now running at 12, right? So and the thing is, it's the same company. All they did was actually articulate it in the way that the investors wanted to understand. So that's why I feel there's a lot of hidden value in our companies, is that we're a bit malu, to talk about how great we are. And I'm trying to encourage them to come out and say more in all languages, English, Malay, and Mandarin, in order to try and get the investors outside to see that Malaysia has a lot of potential.
Okay, ada soalan? Yeah. Yes? Also. I only hope Parliament is like this.
Assalamualaikum.
Baik, ya, sila.
Nama saya Rizal daripada Federation of Investment Managers. We've had a long discussion about the disintermediation of our frontline consultants. We have 60,000 consultants. We accept that in industry, the AI and robotics and robo-advisors have taken a role in middle office and back office. But I wonder whether the panel YB PMX dengan YB Menteri Keuangan kedua and the chairman has been thinking about how there will be disintermediation with AI for the banking and financial services industry going forward, whether there is a study being done or whether the impact of it is something that we have thought about. Thank you.
If Faiz will add color in terms of what happens to the segment. But I think as countries progress, and AI becomes an important thing, the evolution on the depth of the economy is also very important. Yeah. So what is traditionally the role of the remiser, the role of the brokers, the role of these things in the past was effectively to facilitate trade. Yeah, but understanding about wealth management, understanding about product development, innovation along that line is probably the next frontier that needs to be coming in. And what we need to do is also to be a lot more innovative in actually creating better products along the way. I don't think AI will help us as much along that line. Yeah, so if we want to push along the line to create structures, frameworks, and so on that will facilitate tokenization, securitization in a different form, that enables pricing in a better form, I think that's where our talent pool needs to evolve into creation rather than doing what is effectively pushing through the system in order to facilitate trade along the way. Yes?
Right?
So, you know, sometimes I'm asked what keeps me awake at night, and your 60,000 unit trust consultants do, plus the 4,000 remisers, plus the 30 brokers, because I'm really not sure. And remember, part of the master plan is also asking the question, where are we going to be in 20 years? And as I engage with other global regulators, I realize the world is changing much faster than we think. So to give you an idea, we've been talking to some very large digital players in the world, and they are talking about T plus now, not T plus 2 or T plus 1, meaning it's an instant transaction. You beli, money goes. You jual, money comes. Now, that is very scary to a regulator. You know, we like segregation, we like to manage processes, and here is a technology solution, right? And this is already happening. So to your point, I think there may be a role for human intermediation. I think AI actually levels a lot in terms of the playing field because you have access to a lot of information very quickly. But I personally think there's still room for a human. But I am worried about where the capital markets will be in 20 years. So while we focus on the corporate sector and increasing value, I am going to come see you about that question about what do we do with the 60,000 unit trust consultants? Because it begs the question, do the investors of the future want someone to act as an intermediary for them, or do they just prefer buying it on their phone? Which, if you talk to the younger ones, they want to do everything on their phone. So yes, it does concern me. To MK2's point, AI does not scare me because I think it has its uses, but not strictly for our capital markets.
Alan, you want to give some additional input to that question? No. Yes.
Assalamualaikum. Hi, I'm Fairuz from University Malaya from Faculty of Science, Physics. So one of the slides presented by the YBMK is the slide on the E component. One part of it is the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone. So I want to jump a bit on the question previously on the AI. Now it's moving on the quantum finance. Okay. So as global financial institutions begin transitioning towards quantum finance, where advanced computing dramatically enhances trading speed, risk analysis, and portfolio optimization. So what is Malaysia's strategy to position the GS, Johor Singaporean says, and related economic corridors as a regional hub for quantum-enabled fintech and investment? So if I can elaborate a little bit more, in simple terms, it's about upgrading the financial system from the conventional computing that we currently use to the next generation, more high speed and all. Yeah, there are so many things that can be covered by using that quantum technology. So, you know, globally, they are already experimenting this, but Malaysia, I believe, we have shown a progress stronger on the cybersecurity preparedness, the shield, but still lacking on that part. So, and I believe still there's a talent gap in professionals who understand both advanced physics, since I'm a physicist, and also integrating with the financial systems. Again, my question, what is the government's strategy to close this gap and ensure Malaysia capture value from this emerging quantum finance economy, particularly through that Johor Singaporean says? Thank you.
It's very, very difficult to answer questions that physicists actually put on the table, right? You're asking me to bridge from finance into a realm that I'm very uncomfortable with. But let me try in this particular manner. I think there are prerequisites. And one of the key things that we need to do is to make sure our foundations in building the prerequisites actually exist. So in Malaysia's journey, what we tried to do first was actually to attract and to actually embed in a good foundation of data centers as the first base. Then over time, what we did was we actually upped the quality of the data centers along the way and say that we only welcome if you bring in a bit more than just simple data centers into Malaysia. So I think in the Malaysian environment, we've now got that as a leading one because we started early on in a way. The next leg of the journey was actually to ask the question in terms of what are things that we can actually start to begin to use within the data center space. So what Malaysia should never do is actually become a host. Yeah, we build data centers, we process for other people, and we don't actually use the capability of the data centers internally. Which is why under the government policy, what we're trying to do is to digitalize everything and put everything within the government system through that methodology and then force the methodology to start using the capability that the foundation allows us to do. Which is why we established the Committee on Digital to put in the policies frameworks so that we can start to align it. And everything now starts to come in that form. And even little things that people kind of miss, like our heavy push in My Digital ID was actually to put everybody there along the way. So your entry into the e-government world comes in through the element. So if you want to be participant, come in. When you come in, now we've got our own data to be used along the way. So now we're trying to create mechanisms that we can then put resources behind it to use the AI, to use all these elements to start to develop a capability. And over time, what was happening also under the Sri Zamri is actually to look at quantum computing along the way, build centers of excellence within our university sort of areas and allow them to play with this along the way. And I think that's important. Malaysia needs to learn that sometimes what we need to do is actually take a bet. Take a bet that this is important, create the foundations and spaces for people to play, but put some money for them to play around. Because it's actually from experimenting and doing this that actually we take it to the next leg. So I think we are on this journey. We are on this journey now to start to use the infrastructure that has been laid in the country. And what we need to do now is to accelerate the pace of actually what we're doing. In that version, I think then the capability of the people who need to come in are people that are much more numerate, much more logical thinking in that manner, as opposed to the traditional. And I think that's our greatest challenge in terms of skilling up to be able to do and to push it to the next leg.
Terima kasih. No, what is to me very, very positive development is the response by the universities and agencies like the MCMC, admitting the fact that we have limitations in this. We talk to NVIDIA or Infineon and Intel and Microsoft. They will realize the talent pool is very limited. We will just complain about it. We start embarking on a very, should I say, adventurous and also progressive steps. The AI faculty, the UTM, for example, set up after about 3 months, which is, of course, a major breakthrough record. If you know the university tradition or culture of setting up faculties or units, it would take minimum 8 months. You got a board of studies and faculty, then council, then Ministry of Higher Education, then back to Treasury. But they could do it in 3 months because of the necessity and the need to accelerate the process. And I was with UKM today, stressing on computer computing, working with BlackBerry. Earlier, for example, another company working with Huawei. I mean, the university is working synergy with these companies. when NVIDIA met me and said that they are short of engineers, not just normal engineering graduates, but those with the certain higher niche, then they were open, they went to USM, for example, and had this program. So you bypass all these bureaucratic rules and which has to be followed rigidly in the past. And I think the government do acknowledge the fact that if you talk about digital transformation, energy transition, semiconductor policy, you cannot continue. I mean, if you pursue that agenda, if you are stuck to the old administrative tools, to the Chief Secretary, Shamsul Azri, who's here, has at least undertaken to set up this star in this setup to make sure that we bypass all these rules and then have a fast-track implementation. Because if we don't, I don't think we'll be able to succeed in this sort of AI and then digital. Because I mentioned MCMC, because all the controversies are SPRM only to get MACC. I'm talking about MCMC. For example, LLM, language model is there, quantum computing is there, and then the support and the synergy with universities, which to my mind is very critical, and we're pushing this agenda forward. Even today, I had a session with BlackBerry and quantum computing. Last few months, I had another session with the UTM, and again, quantum computing. So this is, to my mind, very, very, very reassuring, because you find bureaucrats and also academicians who are also stuck with the old culture, are prepared to move with the times, realizing the critical need to part from the traditional ways and move into these new disciplines in a very aggressive manner. And we are responding. I mean, of course, I'm not too patient. I'm quite impatient in my ways. Not that popular with some of my minister colleagues, because I think that if we want to achieve and pursue this, we cannot retain the old culture, both in terms of governance and tolerating too many of the excesses, and also in terms of pursuing this new either disciplines in the universities or new initiatives in terms of achieving our semiconductor goals, which I think Faiz mentioned to me just now, but the success, impressive success in Penang over this apa tadi? Bukan infrastructure, not only infrastructure, but moving up on the value chain, moving up in terms of from the back end to the front end, with fab and etc. But this cannot be seen in isolation, because the ecosystem must be made ready, and this requires, of course, to a large extent, government intervention, state governments, and also the local council involvement. But more so, I think, also require a lot of additional funds. Every new setup, a new faculty, new initiative will require additional funds. And of course, the Treasury should be the last place to be talking about funds now. Alan? Huh?
I think perhaps just one thing to add is actually, when I think as an economist, I think one of the key things that we try to look at is that we need to continuously update how we look at the world. I think so I look at in the region, ASEAN Plus region, I look at Malaysia, I look at Thailand as well, and a lot of the capital that is flowing into the region is going into sectors that are economies that are not very familiar with. Data center. So we look at the matrix that the job creation and so on, and those are, if you look at it purely from those matrix and you do not understand what's the purpose of a data center, you will tend to underestimate its its importance. And so now we are trying to actually understand things a bit more, to look at it in the entire ecosystem, these forward linkages, backward linkages, what data centers enables, and so on. Because we think that it's really key that we, economists, and then through advisory to the governments and so on, we understand what it means. Because if we don't, then we might be taken advantage of. But if we do, then we know how to maximize and leverage on new technology that's coming in. So I always tell my team that, you know, if we really want to be keeping up, you need to think like a CTO, not just an economist, right? Economists tend to need to catch up.
Okay, as Keynes used to say, in the long term, we will all be dead. Okay, thank you.
Salam Sejahtera. My name is Warren. I am representing Consortium AI Negara, which is a group with about 400 over people in AI here in Malaysia. My question today is, although we are talking about capital flows over here, it's about labor. Already we are beginning to see some canaries in the mine, right, in some of the most advanced economies in the world and most advanced companies in the world. Meta has just released 10% of its workforce yesterday. Oracle has released tens of thousands of people globally. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon also said it's okay to tolerate 10% attrition and the bank will still be able to operate. Even Ken Griffiths from Citadel was amazed by the fact that jobs which required PhDs in quantitative finance are now getting done automatically using AI. As for the big four firms like, Dato Faiz, you're from PwC, right? The business model also has to change. From 280,000 employees with KPMG or 300,000 in PwC, they are no longer absorbing as many people. They are reducing graduate hires. Now, my company, we've trained about 200 to 300 companies, right? Every company that we train here in Malaysia, they are mainly on a hiring freeze right now. So my question to the folks in the government is, whilst we are planning and we model for new jobs in terms of growth from new industries, are we also modeling job displacements and the number of jobs which should be required to replace the jobs which could be displaced by AI, even in a country like Malaysia?
Right.
Sure. So, AI has extraordinary benefits, and I'm sure coming from that industry, you can see it. But I'm not sure we're ready to get rid of people here just like that. Now, I'm sure you've seen there's a certain theory of sorts that the people driving the AI phenomena are actually the billionaires. And they would like to have whole factories of robots and AI driving things and not have humans. I remember listening to an interview with someone who was doing a kind of like a Grab Uber outfit. And he was complaining about the fact that actually with an autonomous car, there will come a point I don't need drivers anymore. But I feel, particularly in the context of Malaysia, this is very bad. Because you're essentially equating a human to just another resource that you can bring in and throw out at will. These are people. These are people who have jobs. These are people who have families. And so I would have thought, certainly from my perspective, that we should do all we can to actually use it where it's useful, but not go into the temptation of using it for everything. Now, even within the SC itself, we've started that journey, right, to look at AI and so on. And I realized that actually many of the things that we are playing with seem to be clever, but they're not really, because it has to be trained. And therefore, even some of the outcomes from these tools are not as accurate as you would have thought. And I'm beginning to see now around the world examples of where AI has been used and has actually had the wrong outcomes. So I'm not government, well, I am government, but not federal government in that sense. I'll leave it to the gentleman on my left to explain what government will be doing. But as a regulator of a particular industry, I am concerned about what it will do to the intermediary staff and so on. But I'm not sure that we should panic just yet. One of the reasons I think you're seeing those large tech companies reducing their staff is that they're burning through money every week. I was in a conversation with the IMF the other day, and they were saying they've run out of capital to the point that they are now the biggest borrowers of debt in the US market. Now, there comes a particular point, which of course Malaysians understand, where's the money, right? And then you have the Chinese on the other side disrupting it all by giving AI for free. So I'm concerned not just about the impact to the people, but are we looking at a potential disruption in the market in the near term? So, long-winded way, I don't speak for government in terms of that, but as someone who looks after, if you like, the capital markets, I'm concerned about what it will do to the players, but I'm not frightened for people to use it. Even as a regulator, we are regularly using it, and the outcomes have been generally good, but I don't think I'm in a position yet where I'm going to say, you know, I don't need 10% of my staff to do things, because it's not that level yet, right? So anyway, but you know.
Yeah, Faiz is right. I mean, historical antecedents is one thing. Every change will cause some disruptions. Agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, now technology and AI. Of course, I don't think we should discount that. But I believe in somehow or other human ingenuity will recover that. Firstly, contextually, I don't believe Malaysia is going to face that problem in the near or medium term. These issues having to be confronted by some of the established companies elsewhere. Having said that, of course, we will have to grapple with some of the temporary transient issues that we have to face. But do we really need to worry about the possible disruptions due to AI? Yeah, we need to think, reflect, but not to worry. Firstly, there's always that, as I've said, human ingenuity that will think of and create new avenues, new ideas to be able to resolve that. And human history is a case in point. Secondly, it's not for Malaysia to be unduly worried. What we need to do is to try our level best to ensure that we have a full grasp of what digital transformation is all about, what AI is all about, and to train our guys to be as smart as possible and to make sure our young, our youth have that exposure, that capability, that expertise that is duly required. And let the philosophers think what they need to reflect in the event that we do face this. I'm not necessarily discounting that possibility, but you always look from the historical antecedents. Every major change will cause minor or major disruptions, either nature or creation of man or the misdemeanor of leaders. So what we need to do is to make sure that the political leadership, the business community, the academicians, all work this formula to try and address our immediate challenge and our challenge in the medium term. And I think still is the issue of economic growth, of resilience with competitiveness, of course, and we have a great future ahead, I'm confident. All right?
Can I add to that?
Yes.
So the AI journey is in its early days. So if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, I think in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, people would say jobs are dead, yeah, because the machines are going to take everything else. But what people did not think through was what are new things that get created because the capability that gets created. So in the AI journey, the question to us is then, what are new things that we can facilitate our people to get engaged in? But it does mean that we have to transition the people to those sort of roles along the way. So while some jobs may disappear, like today, you don't have typists. Today, you don't have people doing things that they used to be in the past, but have moved on to something else. So the focus of government is about how do we prep and how do we capture that pace movement in a faster space. That's why from a Malaysian perspective, you see us embrace first, get foundations right, put the education system in the right space, open up more things so that our people rise faster than what this space is going to come in. If we wait for that to come, let everybody else gone further down the road, we will have a harder time. So it's a race. And I think Malaysia is actually doing a decent job of making sure we're a bit further ahead in the race, but doesn't mean it's an easy race. We just continue to have to push and refine and so on. And we have to enable the capability of the new jobs, the new industries that come up to be supported within our system.
That's why we talk about the next wave and capital inflows and not babi in Selangor and UEC. Aduh, hai. Nah, next.
Just a quick point. I think the risk of job displacement is something that we need to look at very carefully and very closely, as of course. And I think there are some CEOs making really distasteful comment on low value human capital and so on. But I think there's one principle that is really key when in facing this issue is that protect people, but not the job. Right, so I think there is a very important distinction. So, like, right, that's what I may say. You do not want to protect a job that is already obsolete, but what you want to do is protect the person that used to have that job. Right. So then, when you approach it from this perspective, you look at things like reskilling and education and so on and so forth. So, not the job, protect the person. Yeah.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum. Ya, Ahmad Berhormat, YB, MK2, Faiz, and so on. I have a question. I guess in the context of AI and digital, obviously, I'm so happy to see the government is really making a lot of initiatives. In fact, I heard just this afternoon that all the KSUs were going through AI education. So that's the context. The question, to what extent the government is real attitude, not policy, with regards to investment losses in AI, digital before this, and now AI. Here's the further context. Obviously, from a policy perspective, it got to be, like we said earlier, got to be boring because it must be predictable and it must be consistent. So a bit boring. And investment in general got to be prudent and calculated. But the investment in AI and digital is high risk, high return. It's a lot of experiments. Now, the question is, I'm no longer in GLC, so I can ask this question. To what extent is government attitude for GLCs and GLICs, for that matter, making losses, big losses? Let me put it into context again. Assuming, as an example, assuming GLICs making 10, 50, 100 million losses, but the portfolio is profitable, but the investment in AI or digital, for that matter, making huge losses. Or in the case of GLCs, the whole year might be a loss, but in a minute they're making profit. To what extent government is attitude and tolerant to this kind of losses?
I don't know about the past, but for the present, my instructions, the GLICs are very clear. As long as it's transparent, good governance, clarity in policies, issue of loss is not a question. Of course, we want them to have good returns in some companies. But for dedicated companies where it's critical to the economy and the future of this nation, we are prepared. Some investments from Khazanah, for example, this bangunan satu Samad, warisan, it's not a commercial decision, but it's a decision to protect the heritage of this country. And we allow that. Similarly, some of the investments into some new ventures which is related to digital economy or AI, I would say it must be done transparently, judiciously, of course, but governance principles adhered to, but otherwise it's not a question of profit and loss. I agree with you totally. Not too much, nanti aku rugi banyak. Yes. Right, it's not quite clear on that. Yes.
Datuk Sri, it's been so impressive how we have demonstrated our resilience in this worked example of an energy crisis. So resilience is competitiveness. We're hearing that it's also a long journey. We need to protect the individual. So I'm wondering if we were also climate resilient in the face of this existential crisis, which is the climate change, we might be performing even better in the long journey, and maybe we're leaving money on the table by not taking that into account right now.
Of course, we stay the course. I mean, a lot of issues raised because temporarily we need to make minor adjustments. But as far as the climate policy is concerned, we are not reneging on that. That much I can say. For example, this not dependence, but some adjustments for immediate necessity, emergency requirements on coal that has to be used. But I don't think it's going to sacrifice the medium-term policy of alternative energy. That's why we're putting a lot of effort, focus on this alternative energy through ASEAN grid from Vietnam to Malaya and to Singapore and onwards, or from Sarawak. But that's still a priority, but it takes time. And meanwhile, some adjustments has to be made, contrary to our earlier policy on climate resilience. Right? Cukup? Satu lagi, last? Yes. Dua last, okay. Yes, please. Glove factor.
My name is Tan Si Lim from
course.
Top Glove Corporation, Berhad. First of all, congratulations to the Malaysian government, especially Ministry of Finance, for having a very good growth, GDP growth of 5.4%. We have 50 factories, 45 factories in Malaysia, 5 factories in Thailand, Vietnam, and we export to 190 countries. Thank you for the past 30 over years. Malaysia government have been supporting very well, and Malaysia being the world largest rubber glove manufacturer in the world. Share with you, but over the past 6 years, during pandemic and especially after pandemic, so Malaysia glove market share had declined because manufacturing is very competitive, especially competition from China, Thailand, and Vietnam. So we were holding 70% of the market share 6 years ago before pandemic. So it had been reducing from 70% drop to 60 to 50. Now we hold 40%, still we're number one. China about 35%, Thailand about 10%. So we see that manufacturing environment globally is very challenging. So who are the winners? The manufacturers of the country that can produce acceptable quality or good quality product like glove and with efficient, low cost. So whether we like it or not, business is business. Nowadays, customer very efficient. So they look for better quality at lower price or cost. So Malaysia in the past was very competitive in terms of raw material, natural rubber, which we lost to Thailand, and utility, we were very efficient, the gas, electricity, water, very efficient, low cost, and labor also very efficient. So for the past 6 years, we have been losing out, especially the synthetic rubber. Natural rubber, we lose out. Synthetic rubber, we have 2 manufacturers here, and their cost is high, and then we lose to China. Their raw material, synthetic, nitrile latex, and of course, their cost very efficient. with a good support from the government, from the whole supply chain. So how we can improve in terms of quality means that the quality product come from quality of the people. How can we Malaysian be more efficient? And also utility. How can our energy cost, electricity cost, water cost be efficient? Also very important is the labor cost efficiency. So in order to compete, we also need foreign workers. We have 50 factories. Each factory, example, 200 workers, we also need 10,000 workers. So our capacity is very big. So we need engineers, executive, chemists, and workers as well. So we hope the government can support us in terms of talents, executive level, and also the worker level, so that we can compete in the world market. Hope we can still maintain Malaysia as the world's largest rubber glove manufacturer and exporter. We export to 190 countries.
Right, thank
so
you.
we need your support. Thank you.
Thank you. No, for workers, of course, talent, as I mentioned earlier, we are increasing the training pool, both TVETs and also universities, colleges. But foreign workers, we are more than 2 million now. So there must be some concern and acceptance of the fact that it cannot go on like that. Most countries, you move up the ladder, then you realize that you can't just depend on foreign cheap labor. So there are areas that, of course, we have to discuss with you and the industry, how to then to make sure that you remain competitive, but at the same time not to be over-dependent on cheap foreign labor. Tasri?
Thank you, Ilmuwan. Now, I must say that we have done very well when it comes to improving our economy, GDP, in terms of attracting investments, as well as improving our competitiveness. So that's raising the ceiling within the context of the Madani economic framework. But the other aspects of it, in terms of raising the floor, one of the most important measures that we have targeted to achieve was 40 or 45% compensation of employees as a percentage of GDP. Now, we were at 33.5% back in 2023. So over 10 years period to go up to 40 or 45 is actually a huge progression to make. 2024 numbers have come out, so we're at 33.6%. 2025 numbers will only be released in July, but I reckon that number will be probably around 34%, certainly not more than 35%. So when you start to break it down in terms of the wages level, and I'm using the wages report, the latest number available based on December 2025 salaries, our median wage is only 3,167 ringgit per month, and only 12% of the workers in the formal sector earn 10,000 ringgit and above. So, I mean, the figures are actually pretty low. So the point I want to make here is actually, I think there must be a lot more attention and efforts to actually grow the income of the people for us to be able to achieve that target of 40 or even 45% for that matter. And of course, that's actually at the national level before taking into account the disparity between the ethnic communities. So for example, the Bushra median wage is only 2,600 ringgit and well below the national level and well below the other ethnic groups. So I do hope that we'll pay a bit more attention on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think very pertinent point, because when you have talked about a neglect of decades and to be repaired now. The fact is that we have to have honesty to acknowledge the fact that it has been largely ignored in the past. We talk about poverty eradication, new economic policy, but you look at the figures. I think I remember Fatimah Kari's controversial research Fatima of University of Malaya, proved the point that in real terms, the income in Putra has not risen, except for the rich cronies. So that's why the policy in the issue of governance is very pertinent. And you realize with the decades of neglect in the past. And the propaganda continue about the Malay survival, etc. But the same people have been robbing from the country. And it is what you have to address. And I think that is why for the policy now, raising the floor is a major challenge. That's why I start with the dealing with the issue of hardcore poor. We manage that. Then we go to reach the higher level, disbursing funds, but through education mainly. And not that easy. As I think we need people like you and economics to then see first to discard obsolete policies of pandemic corruption and abuse, which has been tolerated for far too long by governments. Then now to embark on this policy, and I tell you it's not easy because the opposition is very strong from all parties, including many of my coalition partners, who does not, who just I think so comfortable with the same obsolete, corrupt culture. So I think what we need to do is to have that courage or conviction to move up the ladder, and to ensure that all policies that we are doing now in KPT, in MARA, in some schools, through education, and also the disbursement of funds. And not to be so engrossed and obsessed about Bhumi-Putra or non-Bhumi-Putra, but to focus on these issues. Because if you start talking about the old, to me, obsolete Bhumi-Putra policies, you realize the flaw is not social mobility, not through education. I would strongly support any move to allocate or disburse more funds from Bhumi-Putra. But the excess is because we use the term and allow and condone enrichment and allowing this small breed to amass wealth and by the billions and still say everything seems to be all right. And even many of the so-called elites, Malay elites, tend to support the excesses even now, defending those who are blatantly corrupt and abuse their position. You see why I tend to be a bit strong in these remarks. Because unless we are prepared to change the mindset, we don't deal with the crucial, critical issue, but talk about this facade about having to help the Bhumi-Putra. We are not helping them if we do not change the whole framework of the governance to showcase no tolerance or zero tolerance to abuse of power and corruption, to my mind, and punish those who have done such a disservice to the nation, and be prepared to say that things have to change from now. I rest my case. No, really, because I mean, you raise a very pertinent point, but then how do you deal with this? Why is it we are so quiet and allow these excesses to go on and tolerate it for decades at the expense of the poor, the marginalized? Majority of our Malays, pool of ethnic Indians, Malaysian Indians who are categorized as hardcore poor too in some of the estates, and pool of the, probably in terms of numbers less, but still Chinese, and people in Sabah and Sarawak. You can sense sometimes the bitterness in our engagement with the Sabah and Sarawakians, because again, the same issue. They feel they've been largely ignored and marginalized, and that's true. And how do you expect us in these 3 years to resolve the entire problem that we've inherited for decades? But we must do something, I agree. We must have the courage to address these issues and move. Not to go back chanting the old mantra of the Bhumi-Putra survival, but to stop the excesses and focus on what we consider as critical issues to help the nation, and invariably would certainly help, first, the vast majority, women Putras, not through this policy of perks and advantages, but through transparent policy to help. And I thank you for raising this issue, because I think it's very, you can sense my passion and even frustration to some of these excesses, because the entire politics in this country is there. Do you care really for the poor Malay masses, or just this gimmick or facade of Malay survival, which means your own survival and the excesses you have condoned and protecting those who have been blatantly corrupt and have been known to be abusing the position? My answer is, of course, in the affirmative, that we'll have to pursue an agenda with such clarity and this type of governance. You don't talk so much about Putras, but you know the critical need for the Commission to move up the ladder if it is known and respected as having impeccable credentials in terms of governance. Okay? Right, thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
Terima kasih Yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri atas kupasan yang amat bermakna, bernas serta penuh inspirasi pada malam ini. Setinggi-tinggi perhargaan dan ucapan terima kasih juga dirakamkan kepada ahli-ahli panel atas perkongsian serta pandangan yang cukup berharga sebentar tadi. Dimohon Yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri dan Div Kenamaan untuk bersama para hadirin di bawah pentas bagi sesi bergambar. Para jurugambar diminta untuk mengambil tempat di atas pentas bagi merakamkan sesi bersama Yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri dan Div Kenamaan. Alright. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Maka, dengan ini berakhirlah Majlis Forum Ilmuwan Malaysia Madani kita pada malam ini. Selaku pengacara majlis, saya mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih atas kerjasama yang diberikan. Semoga berjumpa lagi di majlis yang akan datang.